So this is chapter 24, part 2. So the first thing we're going to talk about are some senses, and we're going to start with vision. So you should know you have sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. So with vision, the vision is going to depend on light entering the eye through what's called the cornea and the pupil. So you can see it's kind of the part that bulges out here. We don't necessarily feel that bulge per se. It's not as pronounced as maybe it looks here. The light that then passes through the lens, which is this oval circular thing there in the center, which is similar to lenses when we talked about optics, the convex concave. And what's going to happen there is it's going to be focused, and all of the light should be transmitted on the back of the eyelid. The back of the eye, that yellow portion, which is called the retina. And so, if you have corrective lenses, what it's doing is correcting where the image is basically projected, whether it's too far back behind the retina or too far in front of the retina. The corrective lenses help to put it right on the retina so it can be transmitted. Now the retina holds the actual light sensitive cells of the eyes, and these are called the rods and the cones. When the light hits these cells in the back, it's going to cause an action potential, or it should, that will transmit the information to the brain via what's called the optic nerve. And so sometimes with vision problems, you'll have the optic nerve that'll be impeded in some way. It'll be flared up. And so when they are looking at your eyes, they're usually looking at the back of the eye to look for things like macular degeneration, problems with your retina and optic nerves, things like that. So those rods and cones serve different purposes. Rods are very sensitive to light and are responsible for the vision in dim light. The rods cannot discriminate colors, so at night we only really see shades of gray. So the rods are kind of what helps us see when it's dark outside. So if you're not a very good, if you don't have very strong vision at night and that you lose your depth perception, which happens with age, normally that's associated with the rods not functioning like they should. Cones, on the other hand, detect the actual color, and they respond to the 3 different shades of light, which are red, green, and blue. And they also provide us with the ability to see fine details. And so different purposes. You need to know the purpose of both the rods and the cones. So hearing. The ear consists of 3 main parts: the outer, the middle, and the inner ear. The sound waves, and you can see the outer, middle, inner on this bottom image. The sound waves will vibrate. They'll travel down the ear canal, and they are going to hit the eardrum, which is the little purple oval in the middle-ish ear. It's the beginning of the middle ear. The eardrum will move. It's kind of like a drum, like a timpani. In that case, it's going to move 3 of the middle ear bones: your hammer, your anvil, and your stirrup. So you can see here they're really fine pieces. The hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup right there in the middle of the middle ear. They're going to do that in sequence, and that is going to amplify the sound. It should amplify the sound. In the cochlea, which is located in the inner ear, you have the vibrations will bend due to tiny sensory hairs. We call them hairs because they're not like hair on your head, but they are hair-like in movement, and those will start the action potentials. So you can see here in the image B, you have the hair cells. They're there in little blue. They're attached to the auditory nerve, which then sensory neurons we talked about, which will then transmit the information to the brain. And those are all deep within the cochlea. So people who are born deaf or become deaf or are hard of hearing have some sort of malfunctioning with the cochlea usually, and therefore they have things that are called cochlear implants, which will, they're getting more discreet. When I was a kid, they were definitely much bigger, but now they're becoming more discreet, and I don't even think that they always have to be external cochlear implants anymore. They can do them internally, but that will replace, well, not fully replace, but what it does is take place of the hairs that are not working and provide some sort of transmission due to the cochlear implant providing the same work that a cochlea would in a normal person that hears. When you have ear infections, you normally have a middle or an inner ear infection. When you have water in your ears, usually that's behind your middle eardrum, and I can see the fluid back there. And another thing that's in here that's not shown is eustachian tubes. And the eustachian tubes, well, they are here, but they're not labeled. It's right under the cochlea. It's the little part that kind of juts down in the bottom right hand corner of image A, and that's what connects to your sinuses. So that's further connected into things like your immune system. So smell and taste rely on what's called chemoreception, a process which the chemicals in the smell bind to receptors on the surface of special chemosensory cells. The binding opens ion channels and begins action potentials. So all of these things are felt or smelt or heard or seen because of action potentials. The nose, the eyes, the ears, the mouth, they just really provide like the landing dock for the things to be sensed, but the action potentials is what relays that information to your brain. Now, oddly enough, your smell and your taste are pretty well linked. And so growing up, my grandmother could not smell, which was strange, but she also really couldn't taste anything unless it was really strong. I don't know if it's her allergies are so bad or if something happened or she was born that way. She's 95, so getting information out of her is difficult, but growing up she always said she liked chocolate, and it was funny to me because she couldn't actually taste it or smell it, but she just liked chocolate, and it's probably because of the endorphins that chocolate releases. But normally when you're stuffy in your nose and you can't smell, you also have a really faint taste, because they are kind of intimately connected, that what you smell and what you taste, and the response that your body gets when you smell something that's good, your saliva production starts and your stomach will start to growl. So those are all pretty well connected to each other. Now, touch is the last one we're going to talk about. The sense of touch includes very different senses, including pressure, temperature, and pain. So you can feel pressure that's not painful, and you can feel temperature that's not painful, but then enough temperature, enough pressure can provide the sense of pain. And so separate sensory cells detect touch, light touch, and heavy pressure. So if we look at the little image right here, you can see that the light touch is right there, and then the strong pressure is further down. So when you have light touch, those sensory cells are higher up, closer to the skin, whereas those strong pressure ones are really far down. So you have to provide a lot of pressure, and that's how your body determines that's a lot of pressure, because the sensory cells that are detecting it are deep down. So that's strange to think about, that your body has these things, and it's not the amount of pressure that's being provided that is telling you that. It's that your sensory cells are located in different areas, which tells us how much pressure is being pushed. You have your cold, your heat. Those are both at that upper layer with the light touch. So that's a way to protect our bodies. The cold and hot signal doesn't have to travel very far down through our nerve system to tell us it's hot and cold. It's right there at the surface, which provides us protection. And you can see there are hair cells and things like that are here. And so when someone rubs their hair, for me, when a bug hits my hair, it doesn't have to hit my skin for me to know that there might be a bug on me, because my hair, the roots and the follicles also have touch sensitivity with them as well. All right, so now we're going to talk about hormones. This little bit of section is just going to be kind of an introduction into what we're going to talk about in the next lesson, the next chapter, which is 25, because that's all about reproduction. So hormones are chemical messengers that give instructions to the body. So they're released. Remember we talked about the hypothalamus and the thalamus and the pituitary gland. Those are where those things are. The signal is saying, hey, we need to produce this, goes out, and then it's produced in your thyroid, and then from your thyroid it's going to travel to the area to your body that it's going to serve that purpose. So hormones are produced in one place, usually at your thyroid. They're released into the bloodstream, so that's your circulatory system, and they're received by a target cell somewhere else. So hormones do all kinds of things. They are not just estrogen and testosterone, but they are your cholesterol and your, I'm going to draw a blank on all of these now, progesterone and a number of other things. Protein hormones bind to receptors on the cell membranes of their target cells. So the little hexagonal block right there, binds the receptor, and then it gets received into the cell where it's there to do its job. So your endocrine system is the system in which the hormones are most crucial. I guess it's where they're anything that's related to a hormone is part of your endocrine system. The hypothalamus, which starts up in your brain. You have anterior and posterior pituitary glands, which are responsible for the release of things like cortisol. It's part of your sympathetic and parasympathetic response, your endorphins, your thyroid, which are the butterfly glands right there on the side of your neck, your parathyroid, your adrenal glands, which are down next to your kidneys, pancreas, your ovaries, testes, either or, and then your pineal gland. Okay, and so your pineal gland is up there in your brain. And so you can see that from top to bottom, your endocrine system is going to span a large portion of your body. And there's a variety of different specific organs that are involved in the endocrine pathway. And hormones play an important role in most all of these. So here are some examples of hormones. I could not think of any before. You have the hormones released by the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, your growth hormone, prolactin, which is what women will start producing, or men sometimes if there's a malfunction, or even women who aren't pregnant. If there's a malfunction with your pituitary gland, you could start producing milk at some point. You have your TSH, which is what they test when you go to the doctor, which kind of gives them an idea of what's going on with your pituitary gland. You have oxytocin, which is what stimulates contractions. If you don't go into labor, they usually give you a shot of Pitocin to help kick things along because it's the man-made version of oxytocin. You have thyroid hormones, your T3, T4, calcitocin, which is responsible for lowering your blood calcium. You have epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine is what gets your body going. Norepinephrine is also part of that process, but it serves a different purpose from epinephrine. If you're allergic to anything and you have what's called an EpiPen, the EpiPen is the same hormone here. It's epinephrine, which basically it's going to put your body in a fight or flight response and stimulate your body to kind of respond to the anaphylactic shock that it might be undergoing. Glucocorticoids, that's always a hard word for me to say, which are responsible for raising your blood glucose level. You have mineralocorticoids, which are part of your water and salt balance. Insulin, glucagon. I should drink water before I did all this. Which are part of your glucose maintenance. So people who are diabetic or insulin resistant, insulin's a hormone, and so it's something that your body may not be producing or may be producing too much of, and so we know that that can have an effect, which can make you feel pretty ill. And then we also have our sex hormones, your androgens, which are testosterone, your estrogens, progesterone, and then also melatonin. So melatonin's the hormone that's responsible for maintaining your internal clock. So people who struggle to sleep at night, you may take a melatonin supplement, which is just kind of helping to regulate that internal clock in your body. I actually have a really great internal clock. I kind of wake up at the same time every day. I get tired about the same time every day. And so melatonin for me actually makes me have really bizarre dreams. But for some people, it helps them to fall asleep because their internal clock is not quite there. All right, so reproduction and development. Eggs and sperm are gametes. They are haploid, produced through meiosis, which we're going to talk more about. Eggs are large because they are the result of unequal meiosis. During cell division, the future egg gets almost all of the cytoplasm and the other cells receive very little, and these other cells quickly degenerate. So during meiosis, when we have the egg formation, you're usually only going to have a few. There's not a ton of eggs, and then once you have them, your body slows down on that production over time before you reach menopause, and then you just stop making them altogether. But even then, people who have been through menopause still somehow get pregnant. It's not unheard of, but the chances of it happening are very low because you just don't have a lot of eggs there to be fertilized. The ovaries are made up of follicles. You can see them right here on the very end. They're the parts that kind of go out and look like steer horns or ram horns. This is where the developing eggs are surrounded by support cells. After ovulation, the egg will move down the oviduct where fertilization can take place. So those are the little bitty tubes. If the egg becomes fertilized, it will go through the rest of the meiosis process. After fertilization, the egg will continue on to the uterus, where it becomes implanted into the wall and continues to develop. So we're probably going to talk a little bit more about this, but just to be safe, so if you have a tubal pregnancy, what happens there is the egg becomes fertilized, but it doesn't make it into the uterus, and so the embryo will start to develop right there in the oviduct, and that can cause the fallopian tubes to explode because the uterus expands in a way that the other parts of the female reproductive tract don't. And then as part of the menstrual cycle, when a woman is in her week-long period of her cycle and the bleeding and things like that, that's the uterus wall like sloughing off, which is a terrible word, but it's basically just coming off, and that's what is being menstruated out. It's the uterus wall, and then during the rest of the cycle, the uterus wall is building up, building up, building up, and if there is an implantation, then that's why the bleeding should stop, is because the uterus wall is not being basically lost every month. It's being retained for the duration of the pregnancy. So on the other hand of things, sperm are made in the testes, which is located in the scrotum. So you can see here at the very bottom, from the testes, the sperm are going to move into what's called the epididymis, which is where they will complete the development and then become mobile. And so each sperm, mature sperm, is going to have a head that consists of the DNA, the mitochondria, and the enzymes for penetrating the egg, and then also a tail. So what essentially will happen is that they will, I don't know if I have it here. Yeah, so here it is. The egg is surrounded by what's called a zona pellucida. It's been so long since I've heard these words. I will not ask you to say that word out loud. But once the sperm has reached the egg cell membrane, the membranes will fuse, and then the sperm, if you think back to what it had before, it has these enzymes which are able to penetrate the egg, and so those enzymes will help the sperm basically penetrate into the egg. Without the enzymes, the sperm cannot penetrate the egg. It's basically just going to fuse there and then be stuck there. But the fusing and the penetration of the egg have to happen in order for the egg to become fertilized. So this ensures that the fertilized egg does not end up with too many chromosomes, meaning that there's not one egg and 6 sperm. Doesn't mean that it doesn't happen, because we do have examples of twins and multiple births where there is some sort of extra fertilization occurring, or extra separation during meiosis. But the fact that not every sperm is going to travel fast, and that not every sperm is able to get there and fuse, and not every sperm is able to actually penetrate into the egg, means that we lessen the likelihood that one egg is going to be over-fertilized, which can cause problems if we have too many chromosomes. So skeleton and muscles. The skeleton consists of bones and cartilage. We have what's called an endoskeleton, because our skeleton is on the inside of our body, covered by our largest organ system, which is our skin. So make sure you know that. It includes 206 bones. Our skeleton is primarily responsible for protecting our body. The organs, all of your important organs are, I shouldn't say all of your important organs, but the ones that require life, your brain, your heart, your lungs, are all going to be housed within your ribcage system or your skull. There are, of course, or your spinal cord. There are examples like your stomach is kind of out there, your intestines and things like that, which are not directly housed within your rib cage. Your skeleton is also going to be responsible for supporting and moving your body. If we didn't have bones, we would just be blobby things moving around, maybe flopping around. And your bones also produce red and white blood cells in the bone marrow. So if we were to take a bone slice and cut it down in half, you have the outer compact bone, which is really the strongest portion of the bone. You have the spongy bone, which is in the center of that, and then in the middle of the spongy bone, you have your bone marrow. So anybody who's ever had a spinal tap, or a bone marrow aspiration, where they've taken out bone marrow, that's essentially what they're drilling through to get that bone marrow out. Which they usually won't do unless they're convinced you have some sort of major infection, or unless you're donating bone marrow to somebody else for maybe because they have leukemia or some other type of blood cancer. Your muscles will either contract or shorten. They're connected to your bones via tendons, so that's kind of the anchor from the muscle to the bone. Pull on our bones, which will move us. They can only pull, not push, so we often have pairs of muscles that work in opposition. So for example, your bicep and your tricep. Your bicep is going to pull, that's contract and to shorten, and your tricep is going to lengthen. Now when you get ready to extend your arm back out, you might be thinking, well, my bicep is pushing my arm back out, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is your bicep is now contracting and shortening, and that's causing your arm to extend. And so that's the opposite, the opposition movements. Your leg does the same thing, your foot, your hands, your shoulder blades, all of those have muscles that are usually in opposition. And so that's why being active and moving is important. If you are sedentary and looking down, this has happened to me, looking at the screen too long, my muscles at the back of my neck are being extended for too much, and so what I have to do is kind of do these weird like chicken bob moves to pull my head back, which causes my muscles in the back, which are being extended for too long, it causes them to then contract and shorten, and it opens up the muscles at the front of my neck, which helps alleviate some of my muscle discomfort. So how do muscles contract? Well, the muscle is going to receive a signal from a motor neuron. The motor neurons connect to the muscles through a chemical synapse that uses a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. The acetylcholine starts the action potential in the muscle cells, and the muscle cells contract. A muscle is going to consist of a bundle of elongated muscle fibers. Each fiber is actually a single cell within multiple nuclei. Each muscle fiber contains myofibrils, which are made up of contractile units called sarcomeres. The sarcomeres are made up of actin and myosin, which work together to shorten and contract the muscle. So when you have, if you think about your bicep muscle, it's not just a single unit there. What happens is it's a bunch of individual fibers, which are very intimately connected into one single bicep muscle that's going to move all those individual fibers. Now as you work out and your muscle buildup happens, like your muscles become more defined, more toned, that's a building up of the fiber, a strengthening of those muscles underneath the skin. So here's an image. You have your muscle, the single bundle of muscle fibers, all the little nuclei, and then your myofibrils and your sarcomeres. Okay? You don't need to know anything about the individual steps that you see here on the bottom right-hand side. As long as you could tell me the purpose of the skeleton and the muscle, the neurons that are involved, and that would be enough. Okay? So I think this is the end of chapter 24, part 2. The next one's going to be chapter 25, which is all about sexual reproduction, and then chapters 26 is all about genetics. So we are almost at the end. So make sure you turn in the notes for this chapter to get credit for the lecture notes.